Chapter 16. A Very Frosty Christmas. So, Snape was offering to help him? He was definitely offering to help him. If you ask that once more, said Harry, I'm going to stick this sprout. I'm only checking, said Ron. They were standing alone at the Burrows' kitchen sink, peeling a mountain of sprouts for Mrs. Weasley. Snow was drifting past the window in front of them. Yes, Snape was offering to help him, said Harry. He said he'd promised Malfoy's mother to protect him, that he'd made an unbreakable oath or something. An unbreakable vow? Said Ron, looking stunned. No, he can't have. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure, said Harry. Why? What does it mean? Well, you can't break an unbreakable vow. Yeah, I'd worked out that much for myself, funny enough. What happens if you break it, then? You die, said Ron simply. Fred and George tried to get me to make one when I was about 5. I nearly did, too. I was holding hands with Fred and everything when Dad found us. He went mental, said Ron, with a reminiscent gleam in his eyes. Only time I've ever seen Dad as angry as Mom. Fred reckons his left buttock has never been the same since. Yeah, well, passing over Fred's left buttock. I beg your pardon, said Fred's voice as the twins entered the kitchen. Ah, George, look at this. They're using knives and everything. Bless them. I'll be 17 in 2 and a bit months' time, said Ron grumpily, and then I'll be able to do it by magic. But meanwhile, said George, sitting down at the kitchen table and putting his feet up on it, we can enjoy watching you demonstrate the correct use of a whoopsie-daisy. You made me do that, said Ron angrily, sucking his cut thumb. You wait when I'm 17. I'm sure you'll dazzle us all with hitherto unsuspected magical skills, yawned Fred. And speaking of hitherto unsuspected skills, Ronald, said George, what is this we hear from Ginny about you and a young lady called, unless our information is faulty, Lavender Brown? Ron turned a little pink, but did not look displeased as he turned back to the sprouts. Mind your own business. What a snappy retort, said Fred. I really don't know how you think of them. No, what we wanted to know was, how did it happen? What do you mean? Did she have an accident or something? What? Well, how did she sustain such extensive brain damage? Careful now! Mrs. Weasley entered the room just in time to see Ron throw the sprout knife at Fred, who had turned it into a paper airplane with one lazy flick of his wand. Ron! She said furiously. Don't you ever let me see you throwing knives again! I won't, said Ron. Let you see, he added under his breath as he turned back to the Sprout Mountain. Fred, George, I'm sorry, dears, but Remus is arriving tonight, so Bill will have to squeeze in with you two. No problem, said George. Then, as Charlie isn't coming home, that just leaves Harry and Ron in the attic, and if Fleur shares with Ginny, that'll make Ginny's Christmas, muttered Fred, everyone should be comfortable. Well, they'll have a bed anyway, said Mrs. Weasley, sounding slightly harassed. Percy definitely not showing his ugly face, then? Asked Fred. Mrs. Weasley turned away before she answered. No, he's busy. I expect at the ministry. Or he's the world's biggest prat, said Fred as Mrs. Weasley left the kitchen. One of the two. Well, let's go going then, George. What are you two up to? Asked Ron. Can't you help us with these sprouts? You could just use your wand and then we'll be free too. No, I don't think I can do that, said Fred seriously. It's very character-building stuff, learning to peel sprouts without magic. Makes you appreciative of how difficult it is for muggles and squibs. And if you want people to help you, Ron, added George, throwing a paper airplane at him, I wouldn't chuck knives at them. Just a little hint. We're off to the village. There's a very pretty girl working at the paper shop who thinks my card tricks are something marvelous, almost like real magic. Gits, said Ron darkly, watching Fred and George setting off across the snowy yard. Would have only taken them 10 seconds, and then we could have gone too. I couldn't, said Harry. I promised Dumbledore I wouldn't wander off while I'm staying here. Oh, yeah, said Ron. He peeled a few more sprouts and then said, Are you going to tell Dumbledore what you heard Snape and Malfoy saying to each other? Yup, said Harry. I'm going to tell anyone who can put a stop to it, and Dumbledore is top of the list. I might have another word with your dad, too. Pity you didn't hear what Malfoy's actually doing, though. I couldn't have done, could I? That was the whole point. He was refusing to tell Snape. There was silence for a moment or two. Then Ron said, Of course, you know what they'll all say. Dad and Dumbledore and all of them. They'll say Snape isn't really trying to help Malfoy. He was just trying to find out what Malfoy was up to. They didn't hear him, said Harry flatly. No one's that good an actor, not even Snape. Yeah, I'm just saying, though, said Ron. Harry turned to face him, frowning. You think I'm right, though? Yeah, I do, said Ron hastily. Seriously, I do. But they're all convinced Snape's in the Order, aren't they? Harry said nothing. It had already occurred to him that this would be the most likely objection to his new evidence. He could hear Hermione now. Obviously, Harry, he was pretending to offer help so he could trick Malfoy into telling him what he's doing. This was pure imagination, however, as he had had no opportunity to tell Hermione what he had overheard. She had disappeared from Slughorn's party before he returned to it, or so he had been informed by an irate McLaggen, and she had already gone to bed by the time he returned to the common room. As he and Ron had left for the Burrow early the next day, he had barely had time to wish her a happy Christmas and to tell her that he had some very important news when they got back from the holidays. He was not entirely sure that she had heard him, though. Ron and Lavender had been saying a thoroughly non-verbal goodbye just behind him at the time. Still, even Hermione would not be able to deny one thing. Malfoy was definitely up to something, and Snape knew it. So Harry felt fully justified in saying, "I told you so," which he had done several times to Ron already. Harry did not get the chance to speak to Mr. Weasley, who was working very long hours at the Ministry, until Christmas Eve night. The Weasleys and their guests were sitting in the living room, which Ginny had decorated so lavishly that it was rather like sitting in a paper chain explosion. Fred, George, Harry, and Ron were the only ones who knew that the angel on top of the tree was actually a garden gnome that had bitten Fred on the ankle as he pulled it up for carrots for Christmas dinner. Stupefied, painted gold, stuffed into a miniature tutu, and with small wings glued to its back, it glowered down at them all. The ugliest angel Harry had ever seen, with a large bald head like a potato, and rather hairy feet. They were all supposed to be listening to a Christmas broadcast by Mrs. Weasley's favorite singer, Celestina Warbeck, whose voice was warbling out of the large wooden wireless set. Fleur, who seemed to find Celestina very dull, was talking so loudly in the corner that a scowling Mrs. Weasley kept pointing her wand up at the volume control so that Celestina grew louder and louder. Under the cover of a particularly jazzy number called A Cauldron Full of Hot, Strong Love, Fred and George started a game of exploding snap with Ginny. Ron kept shooting Bill and Fleur covert looks as though hoping to pick up tips. Meanwhile, Remus Lupin, who was thinner and more ragged-looking than ever, was sitting beside the fire, staring into its depths as though he could not hear Celestina's voice. "Oh, come stir my cauldron, and if you do it right, I'll boil you up some hot, strong love to keep you warm tonight." "We danced this when we were 18, said Mrs. Weasley, wiping her eyes on her knitting. "Do you remember, Arthur?" Said Mr. Weasley, whose head had been nodding over the satsuma he was peeling. "Oh, yes! Marvelous tune!" With an effort, he sat up a little straighter and looked around at Harry, who was sitting next to him. "Sorry about this," he said, jerking his head toward the wireless that Celestina broke into with a chorus. "I'll be over soon." "No problem," said Harry, grinning. "Has it been busy at the Ministry?" "Very," said Mr. Weasley. "I wouldn't mind it if we were getting anywhere, but of the 3 arrests we've made in the last couple of months, I doubt that any of them is a genuine Death Eater. Only don't repeat that, Harry," he added quickly, looking much more awake all of a sudden. "They're not still holding Stan Shunpike, are they?" asked Harry. "I'm afraid so," said Mr. Weasley. "I know Dumbledore's tried appealing directly to Scrimgeour about Stan. I mean, anybody who's actually interviewed him agrees that he's about as much as a Death Eater as a Satsuma, but the top levels want to look as though they're making some progress, and 3 arrests sounds better than 3 mistaken arrests and releases. But again, this is all top secret." "I won't say anything," said Harry. He hesitated for a moment, wondering how best to embark on what he wanted to say as he marshaled his thoughts. Celestina Warbeck began a ballad called "You Charmed the Heart Right Out of Me." "Mr. Weasley, you know what I told you at the station when we were setting off for school?" "I checked, Harry," said Mr. Weasley at once. "I went and searched the Malfoy's house. There was nothing, either broken or whole, that shouldn't have been there. Yeah, I know. I saw in the Prophet that you'd looked. But this is something different. Well, something more." And he told Mr. Weasley everything he had overheard between Malfoy and Snape. As Harry spoke, he saw Lupin's head turn a little toward him, taking in every word. When he had finished, there was silence except for Celestina's crooning. "Oh, my poor heart, where has it gone? He's left me for a spell." "Has it occurred to you, Harry," said Mr. Weasley, "that Snape was simply pretending to offer help so that he could find out what Malfoy was up to?" said Harry quickly. "Yeah, I thought you'd say that. But how do we know?" "It isn't our business to know," said Lupin unexpectedly. He had turned his back on the fire now and faced Harry across Mr. Weasley. "It's Dumbledore's business. Dumbledore trusts Severus, and that ought to be good enough for all of us." "But," said Harry, just say Dumbledore's wrong about Snape." "People have said it many times. It comes down to whether or not you trust Dumbledore's judgment. I do. Therefore, I trust Severus. But Dumbledore can make mistakes, argued Harry. He says it himself. And you, he said, looking Lupin straight in the eye, do you honestly like Snape? I neither like nor dislike Severus, said Lupin. No, Harry, I am speaking the truth, he added as Harry pulled a skeptical expression. We shall never be bosom friends, perhaps, after all that happened between James and Sirius and Severus. There's too much bitterness there. But I do not forget that during the year I taught at Hogwarts, Severus made the Wolfsbane potion for me every month. Made it perfectly, so that I did not have to suffer as I usually do at the full moon. But he accidentally let it slip that you're a werewolf, so you had to leave, said Harry angrily. Lupin shrugged. The news would have leaked out anyway. We both know he wanted my job, but he could have wreaked much worse damage on me by tampering with the potion. He kept me healthy. I must be grateful. Maybe he didn't dare mess with the potion with Dumbledore watching him, said Harry. You are determined to hate him, Harry, said Lupin with a faint smile. And I understand. With James as your father, with Sirius as your godfather, you have inherited an old prejudice. By all means, tell Dumbledore what you have told Arthur and me, but do not expect him to share your view of the matter. Do not even expect him to be surprised by what you tell him. It might have been on Dumbledore's orders that Severus questioned Draco. And now you've torn it quite apart. I'll thank you to give back my heart. Celestina ended her song on a very long, high-pitched note, and loud applause issued out of the wireless, which Mrs. Weasley joined in with enthusiastically. Is it over? Said Fleur loudly. Thank goodness. What an horrible... Shall we have a nightcap then? Said Mr. Weasley loudly, leaping to his feet. Who wants eggnog? What have you been up to lately? Harry asked Lupin as Mr. Weasley bustled off to fetch the eggnog, and everybody else stretched and broke into conversation. Oh, I've been underground, said Lupin, almost literally. That's why I haven't been able to write, Harry. Sending letters to you would have been something of a giveaway. What do you mean? I've been living among my fellows, my equals, said Lupin. Werewolves, he added at Harry's look of incomprehension. Nearly all of them are on Voldemort's side. Dumbledore wanted a spy, and here I was, ready-made. He sounded a little bitter, and perhaps realized it, for he smiled more warmly as he went on. I am not complaining. It is necessary work, and who can do it better than I? However, it has been difficult gaining their trust. I bear the unmistakable signs of having tried to live among wizards, you see, whereas they have shunned normal society and live on the margins, stealing and sometimes killing to eat. How come they like Voldemort? They think that under his rule they will have a better life, said Lupin, and it is hard to argue with Greyback out there. Who's Greyback? You haven't heard of him? Lupin's hands closed convulsively in his lap. Fenrir Greyback is perhaps the most savage werewolf alive today. He regards it as his mission in life to bite and to contaminate as many people as possible. He wants to create enough werewolves to overcome the wizards. Voldemort has promised him prey in return for his services. Greyback specializes in children. Bite them young, he says, and raise them away from their parents. Raise them to hate normal wizards. Voldemort has threatened to unleash him upon people's sons and daughters. It is a threat that usually produces good results. Lupin paused and then said, It was Greyback who bit me. What? Said Harry, astonished. When you were a kid, you mean? Yes. My father had offended him. I did not know for a very long time the identity of the werewolf who attacked me. I even felt pity for him, thinking that he had had no control, knowing by then how it felt to transform. But Greyback is not like that. At the full moon, he positions himself close to victims, ensuring that he is near enough to strike. He plans it all. And this is the man Voldemort is using to marshal the werewolves. I cannot pretend that my particular brand of reasoned argument is making much headway against Greyback's insistence that we werewolves deserve blood, and we ought to revenge ourselves on normal people. But you are normal, said Harry fiercely. You've just got a problem. Lupin burst out laughing. Sometimes you remind me a lot of James. He called it my furry little problem in company. And many people were under the impression that I owned a badly behaved rabbit. He accepted a glass of eggnog from Mr. Weasley with a word of thanks, looking slightly more cheerful. Harry, meanwhile, felt a rush of excitement. This last mention of his father had reminded him there was something he had been looking forward to asking Lupin. "Have you ever heard of someone called the Half-Blood Prince?" "The Half-Blood what?" "Prince," said Harry, watching him closely for signs of recognition. There are no wizarding princes," said Lupin, now smiling. "Is this a title you're thinking of adopting? I should have thought being the chosen one would be enough." "It's nothing to do with me," said Harry indignantly. "The Half-Blood Prince is someone who used to go to Hogwarts. I've got his old potions book. He wrote spells all over it, spells he invented. One of them was Levicorpus." "Oh, that one had a great vogue during my time at Hogwarts," said Lupin reminiscently. "There were a few months in my 5th year when you couldn't move for being hoisted into the air by your ankle." "My dad used it," said Harry. "I saw him in the Pensieve. He used it on Snape." He tried to sound casual, as though this was a throwaway comment of no real importance, but he was not sure he had achieved the right effect. Lupin's smile was a little too understanding. "Yes," he said, "but he wasn't the only one. And I say it was very popular. You know how these spells come and go." "But it sounds like it was invented while you were at school," Harry persisted. "Not necessarily," said Lupin. "Jinxes go in and out of fashion like everything else." He looked into Harry's face and then said quietly, "James was a pureblood, Harry, and I promise you, he never asked us to call him Prince." Abandoning pretense, Harry said, "And it wasn't serious? Or you?" "Definitely not." "Oh." Harry stared into the fire. "I just thought, well, he's helped me out a lot in potions classes, the Prince has." "How old is this book, Harry?" "I don't know, I've never checked." "Well, perhaps that will give you some clue as to when the Prince was at Hogwarts," said Lupin. Shortly after this, Fleur decided to imitate Celestina singing A Cauldron Full of Hot Strong Love, which was taken by everyone once they had glimpsed Mrs. Weasley's expression to be the cue to go to bed. Harry and Ron climbed all the way up to Ron's attic bedroom, where a camp bed had been added for Harry. Ron fell asleep almost immediately, but Harry delved into his trunk and pulled out his copy of Advanced Potion Making before getting into bed. There he turned its pages, searching, until he finally found at the front of the book the date that it had been published. It was nearly 50 years old. Neither his father nor his father's friends had been at Hogwarts 50 years ago. Feeling disappointed, Harry threw the book back into his trunk, turned off the lamp, and rolled over, thinking of werewolves and Snape, Stan Shunpike and the Half-Blood Prince, and finally falling into an uneasy sleep full of creeping shadows and the cries of bitten children. "She's got to be joking." Harry woke with a start to find a bulging stocking lying over the end of his bed. He put on his glasses and looked around. The tiny window was almost completely obscured with snow, and in front of it, Ron was sitting bolt upright in bed and examining what appeared to be a thick gold chain. "What's that?" asked Harry. "It's from Lavender," said Ron, sounding revolted. "She can't honestly think I'd wear—" Harry looked more closely and let out a shout of laughter. Dangling from the chain in large gold letters were the words, "My sweetheart." "Nice," he said. "Classy. You should definitely wear it in front of Fred and George." "If you tell them," said Ron, shoving the necklace out of sight under his pillow, I'll... "Stutter at me?" said Harry, grinning. "Come on, would I?" "How could you think I'd like something like that, though?" Ron demanded of Thin Air, looking rather shocked. "Well, think back," said Harry. "Have you ever let it slip that you'd like to go out in public with the words, 'My sweetheart,' around your neck?" "Well, we don't really talk much," said Ron. "It's mainly—" "Snogging," said Harry. "Well, yeah," said Ron. He hesitated a moment, then said, "Is Hermione really going out with McLaggen?" "I don't know," said Harry. "They were at Slughorn's party together, but I don't think it went that well." Ron looked slightly more cheerful as he delved deeper into his stocking. Harry's presents included a sweater with a large golden snitch worked onto the front, hand-knitted by Mrs. Weasley, a large box of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes products from the twins, and a slightly damp, moldy-smelling package that came with a label reading, "To Master, from Creature." Harry stared at it. "Do you reckon this is safe to open?" he asked. "Can't be anything dangerous. All our mail's still being searched at the Ministry," replied Ron, though he was eyeing the parcel suspiciously. "I didn't think of giving Creature anything. Do people usually give their house elves Christmas presents?" asked Harry, prodding the parcel cautiously. "Hermione would," said Ron. "But let's wait and see what it is before you start feeling guilty." A moment later, Harry had given a loud yell and leapt out of his camp bed. The package contained a large number of maggots. "Nice," said Ron, roaring with laughter. "Very thoughtful." "I'd have Rather have them than that necklace, said Harry, which sobered Ron up at once. Everybody was wearing new sweaters when they all sat down for Christmas lunch. Everyone except Fleur, on whom it appeared Mrs. Weasley had not wanted to waste one. And Mrs. Weasley herself was sporting a brand new midnight blue witch's hat, glittering with what looked like tiny star-like diamonds and a spectacular golden necklace. "Fred and George gave them to me. Aren't they beautiful?" "Well, we find we appreciate you more and more, Mum, now that we're washing our own socks," said George, waving an airy hand. "Parsnips, Remus?" "Harry, you've got a maggot in your hair," said Ginny cheerfully, leaping across the table to pick it out. Harry felt goosebumps erupt up on his neck that had nothing to do with the maggot. "How horrible!" said Fleur with an affected little shudder. "Yes, isn't it?" said Ron. "Gravy, Fleur?" In his eagerness to help her, he knocked over the gravy boat, flying. Bill waved his wand and Gravy soared up in the air and returned meekly to the boat. "You are as bad as that Tonks," said Fleur to Ron when she had finished kissing Bill in thanks. "She is always knocking—" "I invited dear Tonks to come along today," said Mrs. Weasley, setting down the carrots with unnecessary force and glaring at Fleur. "But she wouldn't come. Have you spoken to her lately, Remus?" "No, I haven't been in contact with anybody very much," said Lupin. "But Tonks has got her own family to go to, hasn't she?" Said Mrs. Weasley. "Maybe. I got the impression she was planning to spend Christmas alone, actually." She gave Lupin an annoyed look, as though it was all his fault. She was getting Fleur for a daughter-in-law instead of Tonks. But Harry, glancing across at Fleur, who was now feeding Bill bits of turkey off her own fork, thought that Mrs. Weasley was fighting a long-lost battle. He was, however, reminded of a question he had with regard to Tonks, and who better to ask than Lupin, the man who knew all about Patronuses. "Tonks's Patronus has changed form," he told him. "Snape said so anyway. I didn't know that could happen. Why would your Patronus change?" Lupin took his time chewing his turkey and swallowing before saying slowly, "Sometimes a great shock, an emotional upheaval. It looked big, and it had 4 legs," said Harry, struck by a sudden thought and lowering his voice. "Hey, it couldn't be—" "Arthur!" said Mrs. Weasley suddenly. She had risen from her chair. Her hand was pressed over her heart, and she was staring out of the kitchen window. "Arthur! It's Percy!" "What?" Mr. Weasley looked around. Everybody looked quickly at the window. Ginny stood up for a better look. There, sure enough, was Percy Weasley striding across the snowy yard, his horn-rimmed glasses glinting in the sunlight. He was not, however, alone. "Arthur, he's with the minister!" And sure enough, the man Harry had seen in the Daily Prophet was following along in Percy's wake, limping slightly, his mane of graying hair and his black cloak flecked with snow. Before any of them could say anything, before Mr. and Mrs. Weasley could do more than exchange stunned looks, the back door opened, and there stood Percy. There was a moment's painful silence. Then Percy said, rather stiffly, "Merry Christmas, Mother." "Oh, Percy!" said Mrs. Weasley, and she threw herself into his arms. Rufus Scrimgeour paused in the doorway, leaning on his walking stick and smiling as he observed this affecting scene. "You must forgive this intrusion," he said when Mrs. Weasley looked around at him, beaming and wiping her eyes. "Percy and I were in the vicinity, working, you know, and he couldn't resist dropping in and seeing you all." But Percy showed no sign of wanting to greet any of the rest of the family. He stood poker straight and awkward-looking, and stared over everybody else's heads. Mr. Weasley, Fred, and George were all observing him, stony-faced. "Please come in and sit down, Minister," fluttered Mrs. Weasley, straightening her hat. "Have a little perky or some pudding. I mean—" No, my dear Molly," said Scrimgeour. Harry guessed that he had checked her name with Percy before they entered the house. "I don't want to intrude. Wouldn't be here at all if Percy hadn't wanted to see you all so badly." "Oh, Perce," said Mrs. Weasley tearfully, reaching up to kiss him. "We're only looking in for about 5 minutes, so I'll have to stroll around the yard while you catch up with Percy." No, I assure you I don't want to butt in." "Well, if anybody cared to show me your charming garden—" "Ah, that young man's finished. Why doesn't he take a stroll with me?" The atmosphere around the table changed perceptibly. Everybody looked from Scrimgeour to Harry. Nobody seemed to find Scrimgeour's pretense that he did not know Harry's name convincing, or find it natural that he should be chosen to accompany the minister around the garden when Ginny, Fleur, and George also had clean plates. "Yeah, all right," said Harry into the silence. He was not fooled. For all Scrimgeour's talk that they had just been in the area, that Percy wanted to look up his family, this must be the real reason they had come, so that Scrimgeour could speak to Harry alone. "It's fine," he said quietly as he passed Lupin, who had half risen from his chair. "Fine. he added as Mr. Weasley opened his mouth to speak. Wonderful, said Scrimger, standing back to let Harry pass through the door ahead of him. We'll just take a turn around the garden, and Percy and I'll be off. Carry on, everyone. Harry walked across the yard toward the Weasleys' overgrown, snow-covered garden, Scrimger limping slightly at his side. He had, Harry knew, been head of the Auror office. He looked tough and battle-scarred, very different from portly Fudge in his bowler hat. Charming, said Scrimger, stopping at the garden fence and looking out over the snowy lawn and the indistinguishable plants. Charming. Harry said nothing. He could tell that Scrimger was watching him. I've wanted to meet you for a very long time, said Scrimger after a few moments. Did you know that? No, said Harry truthfully. Oh yes, for a very long time. But Dumbledore has been very protective of you, said Scrimger. Natural, of course. Natural after what you've been through. Especially what happened at the Ministry. He waited for Harry to say something, but Harry did not oblige, so he went on. I have been hoping for an occasion to talk to you ever since I gained office, but Dumbledore has, most understandably as I say, prevented this. Still Harry said nothing, waiting. The rumours that have flown around, said Scrimger. Well, of course, we both know how these stories get distorted. All these whispers of prophecy, of you being the chosen one. They were getting near it now, Harry thought. The reason Scrimger was here. I assume that Dumbledore has discussed these matters with you? Harry deliberated, wondering whether he ought to lie or not. He looked at the little gnome prints all around the flower beds, and the scuffed-up patch that marked the spot where Fred had caught the gnome now wearing the tutu at the top of the Christmas tree. Finally, he decided on the truth, or a bit of it. Yeah, we've discussed it. Have you? Have you? Said Scrimger. Harry could see out of the corner of his eye Scrimger squinting at him, so he pretended to be very interested in a gnome that had just poked its head out from underneath a frozen rhododendron. And what has Dumbledore told you, Harry? Sorry, but that's between us, said Harry. He kept his voice as pleasant as he could, and Scrimger's tone, too, was light and friendly as he said, Oh, of course, it's a question of confidences. I wouldn't want you to divulge. Oh, no. In any case, does it really matter whether you are the chosen one or not? Harry had to mull that one over for a few seconds before responding. I don't really know what you mean, Minister. Well, of course, to you it will matter enormously, said Scrimger with a laugh. But to the wizarding community at large, it's all perception, isn't it? It's what people believe that's important. Harry said nothing. He thought he saw dimly where they were heading, but he was not going to help Scrimger get there. The gnome under the rhododendron was now digging for worms at its roots, and Harry kept his eyes fixed upon it. People believe you are the chosen one, you see, said Scrimger. They think you quite the hero, which, of course, you are, Harry, chosen or not. How many times have you faced he who must not be named now? Well, anyway, he pressed on without waiting for a reply. The point is, you are a symbol of hope for many, Harry. The idea that there is somebody out there who might be able, who even might be destined to destroy he who must not be named, well, naturally, it gives people a lift. And I can't help but feel that once you realize this, you might consider it, well, almost a duty to stand alongside the Ministry and give everyone a boost. The gnome had just managed to get a hold of a worm. It was now tugging very hard on it, trying to get it out of the frozen ground. Harry was silent so long that Scrimger said, looking from Harry to the gnome, Funny little chaps, aren't they? But what say you, Harry? I don't exactly understand what you want, said Harry slowly. Stand alongside the Ministry. What does that mean? Oh, well, nothing at all onerous, I assure you, said Scrimger. If you were to be seen popping in and out of the Ministry from time to time, for instance, that would give the right impression. And of course, while you were there, you would have ample opportunity to speak to Gawain Robards, my successor as head of the Auror office. Dolores Umbridge has told me that you cherish the ambition to become an Auror. Well, that could be arranged very easily. Harry felt anger bubbling in the pit of his stomach. So, Dolores Umbridge was still at the Ministry, was she? So, basically, he said as though he just wanted to clarify a few points, you'd like to give the impression that I'm working for the Ministry. It would give everyone a lift to think you were more involved, Harry. said Scrimger, sounding relieved that Harry had cottoned on so quickly. The chosen one, you know? It's all about giving people hope, the feeling that exciting things are happening. But if I keep running in and out of the ministry, said Harry, still endeavoring to keep his voice friendly, won't that seem as though I approve of what the ministry's up to? Well, said Scrimger, frowning slightly. Well, yes, that's partly why we'd like... No, I don't think that'll work, said Harry pleasantly. You see, I don't like some of the things the ministry's doing. Locking up Stan Shunpike, for instance. Scrimger did not speak for a moment, but his expression hardened instantly. I would not expect you to understand, he said, and he was not as successful at keeping anger out of his voice as Harry had been. These are dangerous times, and certain measures need to be taken. You are 16 years old. Dumbledore's a lot older than 16, and he doesn't think Stan should be in Azkaban either, said Harry. You're making Stan a scapegoat, just like you want to make me a mascot. They looked at each other, long and hard. Finally, Scrimger said, with no pretense at warmth, I see. You prefer, like your hero, Dumbledore, to disassociate yourself with the ministry. I don't want to be used, said Harry. Some would say it's your duty to be used by the ministry. Yeah, and others might say it's your duty to check that people really are Death Eaters before you chuck them in prison, said Harry, his temper rising now. You're doing what Barty Crouch did. You never get it right, you people, do you? Either we've got Fudge pretending everything's lovely while people get murdered right under his nose, or we've got you chucking the wrong people into jail and trying to pretend you've got the chosen one working for you. So you're not the chosen one? Said Scrimger. I thought you said it didn't matter either way, said Harry with a bitter laugh. Not to you, anyway. I shouldn't have said that, said Scrimger quickly. It was tactless. No, it was honest, said Harry. One of the only honest things you've said to me. You don't care whether I live or die, but you do care that I help you convince everyone you're winning the war against Voldemort. I haven't forgotten, Minister. He raised his right fist. There, shining white on the back of his cold hand, were the scars where Dolores Umbridge had forced him to carve into his own flesh, I must not tell lies. I don't remember you rushing to my defense when I was trying to tell everyone Voldemort was back. The ministry wasn't so keen to be pals last year. They stood in silence as icy as the ground beneath their feet. The gnome had finally managed to extricate his worm and was now sucking on it happily, leaning against the bottommost branches of the rhododendron bush. What is Dumbledore up to? Said Scrimger brusquely. Where does he go when he's absent from Hogwarts? No idea, said Harry. And you wouldn't tell me if you knew, said Scrimger. Would you? No, I wouldn't, said Harry. Well then, I shall have to see whether I can't find out by other means. You can try, said Harry indifferently. But you seem cleverer than Fudge, so I'd have thought you'd have learned from his mistakes. He tried interfering at Hogwarts. You might have noticed he's not minister anymore, but Dumbledore's still headmaster. I'd leave Dumbledore alone if I were you. There was a long pause. Well, it is clear to me that he has done a very good job on you, said Scrimger, his eyes cold and hard behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Dumbledore's man through and through, aren't you, Potter? Yeah, I am, said Harry. Glad we straightened that out. And turning his back on the Minister of Magic, he strode back toward the house. Chapter 17. A Sluggish Memory. Late in the afternoon, a few days after New Year, Harry, Ron, and Ginny lined up beside the kitchen fire to return to Hogwarts. The Ministry had arranged this one-off connection to the Floo network to return students quickly and safely to the school. Only Mrs. Weasley was there to say goodbye, as Mr. Weasley, Fred, George, Bill, and Fleur were all at work. Mrs. Weasley dissolved into tears at the moment of parting. Admittedly, it took very little to set her off lately. She had been crying on and off ever since Percy had stormed from the house on Christmas Day, with his glasses splattered with mashed parsnip, for which Fred, George, and Ginny all claimed credit. Don't cry, Mum, said Ginny, patting her on the back as Mrs. Weasley sobbed into her shoulder. It's okay. Yeah, don't worry about us, said Ron, permitting his mother to plant a very wet kiss on his cheek. Or about Percy. He's such a prat. It's not really a loss, is it? Mrs. Weasley sobbed harder than ever as she enfolded Harry in her arms. Promise me you'll look after yourself. Stay out of trouble. I always do, Mrs. Weasley, said Harry. I like a quiet life, you know me. She gave a watery chuckle and stood back. Be good then, all of you. Harry stepped into the emerald fire and shouted, Hogwarts! He had one last fleeting view of the Weasleys' kitchen and Mrs. Weasley's tearful face before the flames engulfed him. Spinning very fast, he caught blurred glimpses of other wizarding rooms, which were whipped out of sight before he could get a proper look. Then he was slowing down, finally stopping squarely in the fireplace in Professor McGonagall's office. She barely glanced up from her work as he clambered out over the grate. "Evening, Potter. Try not to get too much ash on the carpet." "No, Professor." Harry straightened his glasses and flattened his hair as Ron came spinning into view. When Ginny had arrived, all three of them trooped out of McGonagall's office and off toward Gryffindor Tower. Harry glanced out of the corridor windows as they passed. The sun was already sinking over the grounds, carpeted in deeper snow than had lain over the Burrow garden. In the distance, he could see Hagrid feeding Buckbeak in front of his cabin. "Baubles," said Ron confidently when they reached the fat lady, who was looking rather paler than usual and winced at his loud voice. "No," she said. "What do you mean, no?" "There's a new password, and please don't shout. We've been away. How are we supposed to—" "Harry, Ginny!" Hermione was hurrying toward them, a very pink-faced and wearing a cloak, hat, and gloves. "I got back a couple of hours ago. I've just been down to visit Hagrid and Witherwings," she said breathlessly. "Did you have a good Christmas?" "Yeah," said Ron at once. "Pretty eventful. Rufus "I've got something for you, Harry," said Hermione, neither looking at Ron nor giving any sign that she had heard him. "Oh, hang on. Password, abstinence." "Precisely," said the fat lady in a feeble voice, and swung forward to reveal the portrait hole. "What's up with her?" asked Harry. "Overindulged over Christmas, apparently," said Hermione, rolling her eyes as she led the way into the packed common room. "She and her friend Violet drank their way through all the wine in that picture of the drunk monks down by the Charms Corridor. Anyway," she rummaged in her pocket for a moment, then pulled out a scroll of parchment with Dumbledore's writing on it. "Great," said Harry, unrolling it at once to discover that his next lesson with Dumbledore was scheduled for the following night. "I've got loads to tell him. And you. Let's sit down." But at that moment there was a loud squeal of "One!" and Lavender Brown came hurtling out of nowhere and flung herself into Ron's arms. Several onlookers sniggered. Hermione gave a tinkling laugh and said, "There's a table over here. Coming, Ginny?" "No, thanks. I said I'd meet Dean," said Ginny, though Harry could not help noticing that she did not sound very enthusiastic. Leaving Ron and Lavender locked in a kind of vertical wrestling match, Harry led Hermione over to the spare table. "So, how was your Christmas?" "Oh, fine," she shrugged. "Nothing special. How was it at Wanwan's?" "I'll tell you in a minute," said Harry. "Look, Hermione, can't you—" "No, I can't," she said flatly. "So don't even ask. I thought maybe, over Christmas—" "It was the fat lady who drank a vat of 500-year-old wine, Harry, not me. So what was this important news you wanted to tell me?" She looked too fierce to argue with at the moment, so Harry dropped the subject of Ron and recounted all that he had overheard between Malfoy and Snape. When he had finished, Hermione sat in thought for a moment and then said, "Don't you think he was pretending to offer help so that he could trick Malfoy into telling him what he's doing?" "Well, yes," said Hermione. "Ron's dad and Lupin think so too," Harry said grudgingly. "But this definitely proves Malfoy's planning something. You can't deny that." "No, I can't," she answered slowly. "And he's acting on Voldemort's orders, just like I said." Did either of them actually mention Voldemort's name? Harry frowned, trying to remember. "I'm not sure. Snape definitely said, 'Your master,' and who else would that be?" "I don't know," said Hermione, biting her lip. "Maybe his father?" She stared across the room, apparently lost in thought, not even noticing Lavender tickling Ron. "How's Lupin?" "Not great," said Harry, and he told her all about Lupin's mission among the werewolves and the difficulties he was facing. "Have you heard of this Fenrir Greyback?" "Yes, I have," said Hermione, sounding startled. "And so have you, Harry." "When? History of Magic? You know full well I never listened." No, not History of Magic. Malfoy threatened Borgin with him," said Hermione. "Back in Nocturne Alley, don't you remember? He told Borgin that Greyback was an old family friend and that he'd be checking up on Borgin's progress." Harry gaped at her. "I forgot, but this proves Malfoy's a Death Eater. How else could he be in contact with Greyback and telling him what to do?" "It is pretty suspicious," breathed Hermione. "Unless—" "Oh, come on," said Harry in exasperation. "You can't get round this one." "Well, there is the possibility it was an empty threat." "You're unbelievable, you are," said Harry, shaking his head. "We'll see who's right. You'll be eating your words, Hermione, just like the Ministry. Oh yeah, I had a row with Rufus Scrimgeour as well." And the rest of the evening passed amicably with both of them abusing the Minister of Magic. For Hermione, like Ron, thought that after all the Ministry had put Harry through the previous year, They had a great deal of nerve asking him for help now. The new term started next morning with a pleasant surprise for the 6th years. A large sign had been pinned to the common room notice boards overnight. Apparition lessons. If you are 17 years of age, or will turn 17 on or before the 31st August next, you are eligible for a 12-week course of apparition lessons from Ministry of Magic apparition instructor. Please sign below if you would like to participate. Cost 12 galleons. Harry and Ron joined the crowd that was jostling around the notice and taking it in turns to write their names at the bottom. Ron was just taking out his quill to sign after Hermione when Lavender crept up behind him, slipped her hands over his eyes, and trilled, "Guess who won one?" Harry turned to see Hermione stalking off. He caught up with her, having no wish to stay behind with Ron and Lavender, but to his surprise, Ron caught up with them only a little way beyond the portrait hole, his ears bright red and his expression disgruntled. Without a word, Hermione sped up to walk with Neville. "So, apparition," said Ron, his tone making it perfectly plain that Harry was not to mention what had just happened. "Should be a laugh, eh?" "I don't know," said Harry. "Maybe it's better when you do it yourself. I didn't enjoy it much when Dumbledore took me along for the ride." "I forgot you'd done it already. I better pass my test first time," said Ron, looking anxious. "Fred and George did." "Charlie failed, though, didn't he?" "Yeah, but Charlie's bigger than me." Ron held his arms out from his body as though he was a gorilla. "So Fred and George didn't go on about it much. Not to his face, anyway." "When can we take the actual test?" "Soon as we're 17. That's only March for me." "Yeah, but you wouldn't be able to apparate in here, not in the castle." "Not the point, is it? Everyone know that I could apparate if I wanted." Ron was not the only one to be excited at the prospect of apparition. All that day there was much talk about the forthcoming lessons. A great deal of store was set by being able to vanish and reappear at will. "How cool will it be when we can just..." Seamus clicked his fingers to indicate disappearance. "Me cousin Fergus does it just to annoy me. You wait till I can do it back. He'll never have another peaceful moment." Lost in visions of this happy prospect, he flicked his wand a little too enthusiastically, so that instead of producing the fountain of pure water that was to be the object of today's charms lesson, he let out a hose-like jet that ricocheted off the ceiling and knocked Professor Flitwick flat on his face. "Harry's already apparated," Ron told a slightly abashed Seamus after Professor Flitwick had dried himself off with a wave of his wand and set Seamus lines. "I am a wizard, not a baboon brandishing a stick." Someone took him. Sidelong apparition, you know." "Whoa," whispered Seamus, and he, Dean, and Neville put their heads a little closer to hear what apparition felt like. For the rest of the day, Harry was besieged with requests from the other 6th years to describe the sensation of apparition. All of them seemed awed, rather than put off, when he told them how uncomfortable it was. And he was still answering detailed questions at 10 to 8 that evening when he was forced to lie and say that he needed to return a book to the library so as to escape in time for his lesson with Dumbledore. The lamps in Dumbledore's office were lit. The portraits of previous headmasters were snoring gently in their frames, and the pensieve was ready upon the desk once more. Dumbledore's hands lay on either side of it, the right one as blackened and burnt-looking as ever. It did not seem to have healed at all, and Harry wondered for perhaps the 100th time what had caused such a distinctive injury, but did not ask. Dumbledore had said that he would know eventually, and there was, in any case, another subject he wanted to discuss. But before Harry could say anything about Snape and Malfoy, Dumbledore spoke. "I hear that you met the Minister of Magic over Christmas." "Yes," said Harry. "He's not very happy with me." "No," said Dumbledore. "He is not very happy with me either. We must try not to sink beneath our anguish, Harry, but battle on." Harry grinned. "He wanted me to tell the wizarding community that the Ministry's doing a wonderful job." Dumbledore smiled. "It was Fudge's idea originally, you know. During his last days in office, when he was trying desperately to cling to his post, he sought a meeting with you, hoping that you would give him your support." "After everything Fudge did last year?" said Harry angrily. "After Umbridge?" "I told Cornelius there was no chance of it, but the idea did not die when he left office. Within hours of Scrimgeour's appointment, we met and he demanded that I arrange a meeting with you." "So that's why you argued," Harry blurted out. "It was in the Daily Prophet." "The Prophet is bound to report the truth occasionally," said Dumbledore, "if only accidentally. Yes, that was why we argued. Well, it appears that Rufus found a way to corner you at last. He accused me of being Dumbledore's man through and through." "How very rude of him." "I told him I was." Dumbledore opened his mouth to speak, and then closed it again. Behind Harry, Fawkes the Phoenix let out a low, soft, musical cry. To Harry's intense embarrassment, he suddenly realized that Dumbledore's bright blue eyes looked rather watery and stared hastily at his own knees. When Dumbledore spoke, however, his voice was quite steady. "I am very touched, Harry." "Scrimgeour wanted to know where you go when you're not at Hogwarts," said Harry, still looking fixedly at his knees. "Yes, he is very nosy about that," said Dumbledore, now sounding cheerful. And Harry thought it safe to look up again. "He has even attempted to have me followed. Amusing, really. He set Dawlish to tail me. It wasn't kind. I have already been forced to jinx Dawlish once. I did it again with greatest regret." "So they still don't know where you go?" asked Harry, hoping for more information on this intriguing subject. But Dumbledore merely smiled over the top of his half-moon spectacles. "No, they don't, and the time is not quite right for you to know either. Now, I suggest we press on, unless there's anything else." "There is, actually, sir," said Harry. "It's about Malfoy and Snape." "Professor Snape, Harry?" "Yes, sir. I overheard them during Professor Slughorn's party. Well, I followed them, actually." Dumbledore listened to Harry's story with an impassive face. When Harry had finished, he did not speak for a few moments, then said, "Thank you for telling me this, Harry, but I suggest that you put it out of your mind. I do not think that it is of great importance." "Not of great importance?" repeated Harry incredulously. "Professor, did you understand?" "Yes, Harry. Blessed I am with extraordinary brain power. I understood everything you told me," said Dumbledore a little sharply. "I think you might even consider the possibility that I understood more than you did. Again, I am glad that you have confided in me, but let me reassure you that you have not told me anything that causes me disquiet." Harry sat in seething silence, glaring at Dumbledore. What was going on? Did this mean that Dumbledore had indeed ordered Snape to find out what Malfoy was doing, in which case he had already heard everything Harry had just told him from Snape? Or was he really worried about what he had heard, but pretending not to be? "So, sir," said Harry in what he hoped was a polite, calm voice, "you definitely still trust—" "I have been tolerant enough to answer that question already," said Dumbledore, but he did not sound very tolerant anymore. "My answer has not changed." "I should think not," said a snide voice. Phineas Nigellus was evidently only pretending to be asleep. Dumbledore ignored him. "And now, Harry, I must insist that we press on. I have more important things to discuss with you this evening." Harry sat there feeling mutinous. How would it be if he refused to permit the change of subject? If he insisted upon arguing the case against Malfoy? As though he had read Harry's mind, Dumbledore shook his head. "Ah, Harry, how often this happens, even between the best of friends. Each of us believes that what he has to say is much more important than anything the other might have to contribute." "I don't think what you've got to say is unimportant, sir," said Harry stiffly. "Well, you are quite right, because it is not," said Dumbledore briskly. "I have 2 more memories to show you this evening, both obtained with enormous difficulty. And the second of them is, I think, the most important I have collected." Harry did not say anything to this. He still felt angry at the reception his confidences had received, but he could not see what was to be gained by arguing further. "So," said Dumbledore in a ringing voice, "we meet this evening to continue the tale of Tom Riddle, whom we left last lesson poised on the threshold of his year at Hogwarts. You will remember how excited he was to hear that he was a wizard, that he refused my company on a trip to Diagon Alley, and that I, in turn, warned him against continued thievery when he arrived at school. Well, the start of the school year arrived, and with it came Tom Riddle, a quiet boy in his second-hand robes, who lined up with the other first years to be sorted. He was placed in Slytherin House almost the moment that the sorting hat touched his head," continued Dumbledore, waving his blackened hand toward the shelf over his head where the sorting hat sat, ancient and unmoving. "How soon Riddle learned that the famous founder of the house could talk to snakes, I do not know. Perhaps that very evening. The knowledge can only have excited him and increased his sense of self-importance. However, if he was frightening or impressing fellow Slytherins with his displays of Parseltongue in their common room, no hint of it reached the staff. He showed no sign of outward arrogance or aggression at all. As an unusually talented and very good-looking orphan, he naturally drew attention and sympathy from the staff almost from the moment of his arrival. He seemed polite, quiet, and thirsty for knowledge. Nearly all were most favorably impressed by him." "Didn't you tell them, sir, what he'd been like when you met him at the orphanage?" asked Harry.
"No, I did not. Though he had shown no hint of remorse, it was possible that he felt sorry for how he had behaved before, and was resolved to turn over a fresh leaf. I chose to give him that chance."
Dumbledore paused and looked inquiringly at Harry, who had opened his mouth to speak. Here again was Dumbledore's tendency to trust people in spite of overwhelming evidence that they did not deserve it. But then Harry remembered something. "But you didn't really trust him, sir, did you? He told me. The riddle who came out of that diary said Dumbledore never seemed to like me as much as the other teachers did."
"Let us say that I did not take it for granted that he was trustworthy," said Dumbledore. "I had, as I have already indicated, resolved to keep a close eye upon him, and so I did. I cannot pretend that I gleaned a great deal from my observations at first. He was very guarded with me. He felt, I am sure, that in the thrill of discovering his true identity, he had told me a little too much. He was careful never to reveal as much again, but he could not take back what he had let slip in his excitement, nor what Mrs. Cole had confided in me. However, he had the sense never to try and charm me as he charmed so many of my colleagues. As he moved up the school, he gathered about him a group of dedicated friends. I call them that for want of a better term, although, as I have already indicated, Riddle undoubtedly felt no affection for any of them. This group had a kind of dark glamour within the castle. They were a motley collection, a mixture of the weak seeking protection, the ambitious seeking some shared glory, and the thuggish gravitating toward a leader who could show them more refined forms of cruelty. In other words, they were the forerunners of the Death Eaters, and indeed some of them became the first Death Eaters after leaving Hogwarts. Rigidly controlled by Riddle, they were never detected in open wrongdoing, although their 7 years at Hogwarts were marked by a number of nasty incidences, to which they were never satisfactorily linked. The most serious of which, of course, the opening of the Chamber of Secrets, which resulted in the death of a girl. As you know, Hagrid was wrongly accused of that crime. I have not been able to find many memories of Riddle at Hogwarts, said Dumbledore, placing his withered hand on the pensieve. Few who knew him then are prepared to talk about him. They are too terrified. What I know I found out after he had left Hogwarts, after much painstaking effort, after tracing those few who could be tricked into speaking, after searching old records and questioning Muggle and Wizard witnesses alike. Those whom I could persuade told me that Riddle was obsessed with his parentage. That is understandable, of course. He had grown up in an orphanage and naturally wished to know how he came to be there. It seemed that he searched in vain for some trace of Tom Riddle Sr. on the shields in the trophy room, on the lists of prefects in the old school records, even in the books of wizarding history. Finally, he was forced to accept that his father had never set foot in Hogwarts. I believe that it was then that he dropped the name forever, assuming the identity of Lord Voldemort, and began his investigations into his previously despised mother's family, the woman whom you will remember he had thought could not be a witch if she had succumbed to the shameful human weakness of death. All he had to go upon was the single name Marvolo, which he knew from those who ran the orphanage had been his mother's father's name. Finally, after painstaking research through old books of wizarding families, he discovered the existence of Slytherin's surviving line. In the summer of his 16th year, he left the orphanage, to which he returned annually, to set off to find his gaunt relatives. And now, Harry, if you will stand. Dumbledore rose, and Harry saw that again he was holding a small crystal bottle filled with swirling pearly memory. I was very lucky to collect this, he said as he poured the gleaming mass into the pensieve, as you will understand when we have experienced it. Shall we? Harry stepped up to the stone basin and bowed obediently until his face sank through the surface of the memory. He felt the familiar sensation of falling through nothingness, and then landed upon a dirty stone floor in almost total darkness. It took him several seconds to recognize the place, by which time Dumbledore had landed beside him. The Gaunt's house was now more indescribably filthy than anywhere Harry had ever seen. The ceiling was thick with cobwebs, the floor coated in grime. Moldy and rotting food lay upon the table amidst a mass of crusted pots. The only light came from a single, guttering candle placed at the feet of a man with hair and beard so overgrown Harry could see neither eyes nor mouth. He was slumped in an armchair by the fire, and Harry wondered for a moment whether he was dead. But then there came a loud knock on the door, and the man jerked awake, raising a wand in his right hand and a short knife in his left. The door creaked open. There on the threshold, holding an old-fashioned lamp, stood a boy Harry recognized at once. Tall, pale, dark-haired and handsome. The teenage Voldemort. Voldemort's eyes moved slowly around the hovel and then found the man in the armchair. For a few seconds they looked at each other. Then the man staggered upright, the many empty bottles at his feet clattering and tinkling across the floor. "You!" he bellowed. "You!" And he hurtled drunkenly at Riddle, wand and knife held aloft. "Stop!" Riddle spoke in Parseltongue. The man skidded into the table, sending moldy pots crashing to the floor. He stared at Riddle. There was a long silence while they contemplated each other. The man broke it. "You speak it?" "Yes, I speak it," said Riddle. He moved forward into the room, allowing the door to swing shut behind him. Harry could not help but feel a resentful admiration for Voldemort's complete lack of fear. His face merely expressed disgust and, perhaps, disappointment. "Where is Marvolo?" he asked. "Dead," said the other. "Died years ago, didn't he?" Riddle frowned. "Who are you, then?" "I'm Morphin, ain't I?" "Marvolo's son?" "Course I am, then." Morphin pushed the hair out of his dirty face, the better to see Riddle, and Harry saw that he wore Marvolo's black stoned ring on his right hand. "I thought you was that muggle," whispered Morphin. "You look mighty like that muggle." "What muggle?" said Riddle sharply. "That muggle what my sister took a fancy to. That muggle what lives in the big house over the way," said Morphin, and he spat unexpectedly upon the floor between them. "You look right like him, Riddle. But he's older now, ain't he? He's older than you, now I think on it." Morphin looked slightly dazed and swayed a little, still clutching the edge of the table for support. "He come back, see," he added stupidly. Voldemort was gazing at Morphin as though appraising his possibilities. He moved a little closer and said, "Riddle came back." "Or he left her, and serve her right marrying filth," said Morphin, spitting on the floor again. "Robbed us mine before she ran off. Where's the locket, eh? Where's Slytherin's locket?" Voldemort did not answer. Morphin was working himself into a rage again. He brandished his knife and shouted, "Dishonored us! She did, that little slut! And who are you, coming here and asking questions about all that? It's over, ain't it? It's over." He looked away, staggering slightly, and Voldemort moved forward. As he did so, an unnatural darkness fell, extinguishing Voldemort's lamp and Morphin's candle, extinguishing everything. Dumbledore's fingers closed tightly around Harry's arm, and they were soaring back into the present again. The soft golden light in Dumbledore's office seemed to dazzle Harry's eyes after that impenetrable darkness. "Is that all?" said Harry at once. "Why did it go dark? What happened?" "Because Morphin could not remember anything from that point onward," said Dumbledore, gesturing Harry back into his seat. "When he awoke next morning, he was lying on the floor, quite alone. Marvolo's ring had gone. Meanwhile, in the village of Little Hangleton, a maid was running along the high street screaming that there were 3 bodies lying in the drawing room of the big house. Tom Riddle Sr. and his mother and father. The Muggle authorities were perplexed, as far as I am aware. They do not know to this day how the Riddles died, for the Avada Kedavra curse does not usually leave any sign of damage. The exception sits before me," Dumbledore added with a nod to Harry's scar. "The Ministry, on the other hand, knew at once that this was a wizard's murder. They also knew that a convicted Muggle hater lived across the valley from the Riddle's house, a Muggle hater who had already been imprisoned once for attacking one of the murdered people. So the Ministry called upon Morphin. They did not need to question him to use Veritaserum or Legilimency. He admitted to the murder on the spot, giving details only the murderer could know. He was proud, he said, to have killed the Muggles. He had been waiting his chance all these years. He handed over his wand, which was proved at once to have been used to kill the Riddles, and he permitted himself to be led off to Azkaban without a fight. All that disturbed him was the fact that his father's ring had disappeared. 'He'll kill me for losing it,' he told his captors over and over again. 'He'll kill me for losing his ring.' And that apparently was all he ever said again. He lived out the remainder of his life in Azkaban, lamenting the loss of Marvolo's last heirloom, and is buried beside the prison, alongside the other poor souls who have expired within its walls. So Voldemort stole Morphin's wand and used it? Said Harry, sitting up straight. That's right, said Dumbledore. We have no memories to show us this, but I think we can be fairly sure what happened. Voldemort stupefied his uncle, took his wand, and proceeded across the valley to the big house over the way. There he murdered the Muggle man who had abandoned his witch mother, and for good measure, his Muggle grandparents, thus obliterating the last of the unworthy Riddle line, and revenging himself upon the father who never wanted him. Then he returned to the Gaunt Hovel, performed the complex bit of magic that would implant a false memory in his uncle's mind, laid Morphin's wand beside its unconscious owner, pocketed the ancient ring he wore, and departed. And Morphin never realized he hadn't done it? Never, said Dumbledore. He gave, as I say, a full and boastful confession. But he had this real memory in him all the time. Yes, but it took a great deal of skilled legitimacy to coax it out of him, said Dumbledore. And why should anybody delve further into Morphin's mind when he had already confessed to the crime? However, I was able to secure a visit to Morphin in the last weeks of his life, by which time I was attempting to discover as much as I could about Voldemort's past. I extracted this memory with difficulty. When I saw what it contained, I attempted to use it to secure Morphin's release from Azkaban. Before the Ministry reached their decision, however, Morphin had died. But how come the Ministry didn't realize that Voldemort had done all that to Morphin? Harry asked angrily. He was underage at the time, wasn't he? I thought they could detect underage magic. You are quite right. They can detect magic, but not the perpetrator. You will remember that you were blamed by the Ministry for the hover charm that was in fact cast by Dobby, growled Harry. This injustice still rankled. So if you're underage, and you can do magic inside an adult witch or wizard's house, the Ministry won't know? They will certainly be unable to tell who performed the magic, said Dumbledore, smiling slightly at the great look of indignation on Harry's face. They rely on witch and wizard parents to enforce their offspring's obedience while within their walls. Well, that's rubbish, snapped Harry. Look what happened here. Look what happened to Morphin. I agree, said Dumbledore. Whatever Morphin was, he did not deserve to die as he did, blamed for murders that he had not committed. But it is getting late, and I want you to see this other memory before we part. Dumbledore took from an inside pocket another crystal phial, and Harry fell silent at once, remembering that Dumbledore had said it was the most important one he had collected. Harry noticed that the contents proved difficult to empty into the Pensieve, as though they had congealed slightly. Did memories go bad? This will not take long, said Dumbledore, when he had finally emptied the phial. We shall be back before you know it. Once more into the Pensieve, then. And Harry fell again, through the silver surface, landing this time right in front of a man he recognized at once. It was a much younger Horace Slughorn. Harry was so used to him bald that he found the sight of Slughorn with thick, shiny, straw-colored hair quite disconcerting. It looked as though he had had his head thatched, though there was already a shiny galleon-sized bald patch on his crown. His mustache, less massive than it was these days, was gingery blonde. He was not quite as rotund as the Slughorn Harry knew, though the golden buttons on his richly embroidered waistcoat were taking a fair amount of strain. His little feet resting upon a velvet poof, he was sitting well back in a comfortable winged armchair, one hand grasping a small glass of wine, the other searching through a box of crystallized pineapple. Harry looked around as Dumbledore appeared beside him, and saw that they were standing in Slughorn's office. Half a dozen boys were sitting around Slughorn, all on harder or lower seats than his, and all in their mid-teens. Harry recognized Voldemort at once. His was the most handsome face, and he looked the most relaxed of all the boys. His right hand lay negligently upon the arm of his chair. With a jolt, Harry saw that he was wearing Marvolo's gold and black ring. He had already killed his father. "Sir, is it true that Professor Merrythought is retiring?" he asked.
Tom, if I knew I couldn't tell you," said Slughorn, wagging a reproving sugar-covered finger at Riddle, though ruining the effect slightly by winking. "I must say, I'd like to know where you get your information, boy. More knowledgeable than half the staff you are."
Riddle smiled. The other boys laughed and cast him admiring looks.
"What with your uncanny ability to know things you shouldn't, and your careful flattery of the people who matter. Thank you for the pineapple, by the way. You're quite right. It is my favorite."
As several of the boys tittered, something very odd happened. The whole room was suddenly filled with a thick white fog, so that Harry could see nothing but the face of Dumbledore, who was standing right beside him. Then Slughorn's voice rang out through the mist, unnaturally loudly.
You'll go wrong, boy! Mark my words!
The fog cleared as suddenly as it had appeared, and yet nobody made any allusion to it, nor did anybody look as though anything unusual had just happened. Bewildered, Harry looked around as a small golden clock standing upon Slughorn's desk chimed 11 o'clock.
Good gracious! Is it that time already? Said Slughorn. You'd better get going, boys, or we'll all be in trouble. Lestrange, I want your essay by tomorrow, or it's detention. Same goes for you, Avery.
Slughorn pulled himself out of his armchair and carried his empty glass over to his desk as the boys filed out. Voldemort, however, stayed behind. Harry could tell he had dawdled deliberately, wanting to be last in the room with Slughorn.
Oh, look sharp, Tom,
said Slughorn, turning around and finding him still present.
You don't want to be caught out of bed out of hours. And you, a prefect.
Sir, I wanted to ask you something.
Ask away then, my boy, ask away.
Sir, I wondered what you know about Horcruxes. And it happened all over again. The dense fog filled the room so that Harry could not see Slughorn or Voldemort at all. Only Dumbledore, smiling serenely beside him. Then Slughorn's voice boomed out again, just as it had done before.
I don't know anything about Horcruxes, and I wouldn't tell you if I did. Now get out of here at once, and don't let me catch you mentioning them again!
Well, that's that, said Dumbledore placidly beside Harry. Time to go. And Harry's feet left the floor to fall seconds later back onto the rug in front of Dumbledore's desk. That's all there is? Said Harry blankly. Dumbledore had said that this was the most important memory of all, but he could not see what was so significant about it. Admittedly, the fog and the fact that nobody seemed to have noticed it was odd, but other than that, nothing seemed to have happened except that Voldemort had asked a question and failed to get an answer. As you might have noticed, said Dumbledore, reseating himself behind his desk, that memory has been tampered with. Tampered with, repeated Harry, sitting back down. Certainly, said Dumbledore. Professor Slughorn has meddled with his own recollections. But why would he do that? Because I think he is ashamed of what he remembers, said Dumbledore. He has tried to rework the memory to show himself in a better light, obliterating those parts which he does not wish me to see. It is, as you will have noticed, very crudely done, and that is all to the good, for it shows that the true memory is still there beneath the alterations. And so, for the first time, I am giving you homework, Harry. It will be your job to persuade Professor Slughorn to divulge the real memory, which will undoubtedly be our most crucial piece of information of all. Harry stared at him. But surely, sir, he said, keeping his voice as respectful as possible, you don't need me. You could use Legilimency or Veritaserum. Professor Slughorn is an extremely able wizard who will be expecting both, said Dumbledore. He is much more accomplished at occlumency than poor Morphin Gaunt, and I would be astonished if he has not carried an antidote to Veritaserum with him ever since I coerced him into giving me this travesty of a recollection. No, I think it would be foolish to attempt to wrest the truth from Professor Slughorn by force, and might do much more harm than good. I do not wish him to leave Hogwarts. However, he has his weaknesses like the rest of us, and I believe that you are the one person who might be able to penetrate his defenses. It is most important that we secure the true memory, Harry. How important, we will only know when we have seen the real thing. So, good luck, and good night. A little taken aback by the abrupt dismissal, Harry got to his feet quickly. Good night, sir. As he closed the study door behind him, he distinctly heard Phineas Nigellus say, I can't see why the boy should be able to do it better than you, Dumbledore. I wouldn't expect you to, Phineas, replied Dumbledore, and Fawkes gave another low, musical cry.